You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth!
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You can't handle the truth!
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
Well, happy Halloween, everyone. And for today's rant, we're going to talk a little bit about the subject of race in the marijuana reform community. And this was brought to my attention by someone who I hold in incredibly high esteem, Dr. Hart, the neuropsychopharmacologist at the Columbia University, one of the two American researchers who's been approved to work with cannabis, actual cannabis, and give it to people and test them. Anyway, Dr. Hart has a new book out. It's an amazing book, high price, and you should check it out. But today in The Nation magazine, he wrote a piece called Pot Reform's Race Problem. The fight against marijuana prohibition must put racial justice at the center. And this is a topic that'd be very interesting to discuss because there's really not a right or a wrong answer here. It's just interesting to see how people perceive the issue. Dr. Hart, if you do not know, is black and one of the very few black men in academia and drug law reform in those issues. So he's got a very interesting and very learned perspective on the issue. Now, what he points out, he says there's more than 700,000 marijuana arrests, which account for more than half of all drug arrests. And because of the selective targeting of African-American males, 1 in 3 black boys born today will spend time in prison. 1 out of 3. 1 out of 3 black boys that you see is going to go to prison sometime in his life. And he points this out as a public health issue. This is something that needs to be looked at from that perspective. And he goes on further to say the scientific community has ignored this shameful marijuana-related effect. There are virtually no articles in the scientific community, scientific literature addressing it. One possible reason is that the National Institutes of Health has not made it a priority to understand or prevent racial discrimination, even though racism and its impact on health is very well documented. But he gets to the meat of the issue, I think, when he points out that another reason for this blind spot is the researchers themselves are overwhelmingly non-black. And this is not unique to scientists. The major law reform organizations, such as Marijuana Policy Project and NORML, Dr. Hart writes, have also largely ignored this obvious injustice. About a month ago, I appeared on a Pacifica radio station in Washington, D.C. with a director from one such group who said, quote, "We know there are stop and frisk policies and so forth that are terribly racially discriminatory, but we're looking at the big picture of public health," end quote. In his view, the racist enforcement of marijuana laws was not a big picture item. The more pressing issue, he explained, is correcting the erroneous belief that marijuana is a gateway drug to harder substances. Dr. Hart writes, "I had to exercise a great deal of restraint as I listened incredulously to this person dismiss the grave injustice being perpetrated against black people." And then he goes to point out that for the most part, MPP and NORML, their boards are largely white, although full credit is due to NORML for bringing on more people of color, more women onto the board. Same for MPP. He also points out, Dr. Hart points out, that he's on the board of Drug Policy Alliance, which tends to have a more broader audience and more broader board. So this was interesting to me to get Dr. Hart's perspective on this issue and his point that marijuana reform needs to be a civil rights issue, needs to be a civil justice issue. But in the comments section, Mason Tvert actually responded. Mason Tvert from MPP. Now, I don't know if he was the person on the Pacific station with Dr. Hart particularly, but Mason says, "I'm disappointed by Dr. Hart's assertion that organizations like MPP and NORML are somehow dismissive of the racial injustice. Just because the orgs don't adhere strictly to that one aspect does not mean it's dismissive. After all, there are many good reasons to repeal marijuana prohibition." And here's a big one from Mason. "And quite frankly, many of those other reasons have been proven to be more effective when it comes to actually changing laws and repealing marijuana prohibition." So Dr. Hart's assertion is that we need to be a civil rights issue. We need to bring the racial injustice to the center of marijuana reform. Mason seems to be saying it's part of the issue, but there's other parts of the issue that poll better. Maybe the marijuana is safer part. Maybe the tax revenue part. Maybe the carding kids part. I don't know particularly. But that's what he says. Quite frankly, many of those other reasons have been proven to be more effective. Now, there was another commenter who kind of rephrased that in a way to make you think a little. On the other hand, if you tell white people that getting busted for pot is particularly a black person's problem, white people may lose interest in actually doing anything about it. So that's the double-edged sword of the race issue in marijuana reform. And it's something I dealt with from 2009 to 2012 when I was NORML's outreach director. I was always searching for ways to bring more Latinos and African Americans into marijuana reform. And it vexed me because I'm not the guy that's going to get busted. For the most part, statistically speaking, I'm a middle-aged white dude. The chances of me seeing the inside of a cell for the fact that I use marijuana are very, very low. And it always bothered me, why is it that the communities that are so largely impacted by marijuana prohibition aren't the ones who are populating the marijuana reform movement? I hypothesize that, gee, maybe when you've already got a target on your back, you don't want to really stand up and be the let's legalize pot guy. Maybe there's something to do that. Maybe there's something in what Madeline Martinez taught me when I started with Oregon NORML in 2005. She, being one of the few women and maybe one of the only Latinos running a drug law reform chapter, said color attracts color. And sure enough, when she was leading Oregon NORML, our membership seemed to be pretty diverse. And I gotta qualify that by the fact that we're in Portland, Oregon, the whitest city in America, the whitest large city in America. But even for Portland, we seem to have a pretty diverse, broad range of membership and supporters. I would love to find more people involved. And when I was at this International Reform Conference, I realized that maybe my hypothesis is wrong. Maybe just the language was wrong. Maybe the message was wrong. Maybe Dr. Hart's right in that framing this as a civil rights issue is the way to bring in more minority support. Because when I was there at the DPA conference, I saw lots and lots of people from all sorts of backgrounds from all over the world who were involved in this issue. And so I know it can be done. I know that we can bring more people into the movement. It's just a matter of how we shape that message. And as this other commenter kind of flippantly put it, by doing so, do we actually hurt the movement? If the real goal is to help end the marijuana prohibition because it is so racially pernicious, that it is so disproportionate to people of color, does it do black folks any good if we hype how bad it is for black folks and then that turns off white folks from wanting to help? That's an interesting question. I do look back to the civil rights movement for some guidance on this and saw that if it wasn't for the help of a lot of white folks that were standing and marching with Dr. King and all these civil rights revolutionaries, that it never could have happened. So we'll take this into hour 2 in Toker Talk Radio. We'll talk more about race and the marijuana reform issue. Is Dr. Hart right? Is it an issue that needs to be at the forefront of reform? Is Mason Tvert right, where it might not be the best polling issue? We'll talk about it with our audience here. You can call in live at 971-533-7111. We're here every weekday from 3 to 5 Pacific time right here on 420radio.org. If you missed any of the beginning, replays at 6 and 9 a.m. and p.m. For Dr. Brian the Red, I'm the pothead pinhead, or the pinhead pothead. I'm not sure which. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it. and it goes down smooth.